Town left fat girl to die in blizzard. Mountain man found her. You're mine now, he said. Leave her, the shopkeeper hissed as the wind howled outside. She'll only slow you down. That was the last thing Harriet Brennan heard before the door slammed shut, locking her out of warmth, safety, and mercy. The blizzard had swallowed the town whole, snow twisting like ghosts through the empty streets of Silverwood. Every lamp was dark, every window barred. Hattie stumbled through knee-deep snow, clutching her shawl tight, her fingers blue and trembling. "Please," she whispered, knocking on one more door. No answer. Inside, she heard voices, laughter, then silence. They had decided to let her die. When her legs gave out, she sank into the white, her breaths coming slower, softer, until even the wind seemed to fade. So this is how it ends, she thought, unwanted, unloved, forgotten. But miles away, through that same storm, a man named Garrett Wolfe, known to the townsfolk as Gray, was making his way down the ridge, leading his horse through the snow. A man carved from the mountains themselves, he trusted no one and owed the world nothing, until his lantern caught a glimpse of something half buried in the drift. A hand, pale against the dark. He dropped to his knees, brushed the snow away, and lifted the frozen girl into his arms. Her lips were blue, her pulse faint. "Not tonight," he growled, wrapping her in his coat. "You're not dying out here." By the time they reached his cabin, she was half conscious. The last thing she heard before darkness took her was his voice, deep, rough, and certain. "You're mine now, and no one's ever leaving you to die again." When Hattie woke, it was to warmth, a deep, radiant warmth that she hadn't felt in years. Firelight flickered against the log walls, casting soft orange light over the small cabin. The smell of pine smoke and venison stew hung in the air. For a long moment, she didn't move. She was afraid it was a dream, afraid that if she opened her eyes fully, the cold would return and she'd be back in that snow-covered street, forgotten. Then she heard the sound of boots against the floorboards. Slow, heavy, purposeful. A man appeared from the shadows, tall, broad-shouldered, his beard flecked with gray. His shirt sleeves were rolled up, revealing arms lined with scars and strength. He carried a bowl and set it on the table beside her. "Eat," he said simply. His voice was rough, like gravel and smoke. Hattie tried to sit up, but winced as her muscles protested. Where am I?" "In my cabin," he replied, pulling up a chair. "Half a day's ride north of Silverwood. I found you buried under a drift." Her lips trembled. "Everyone, they closed their doors." "I know," he said, his jaw tightening. "That town's full of cowards, only brave when they're picking on someone weaker." He didn't say more. He just handed her a spoon. When she took it, her hand shook so badly that broth spilled down her wrist. Without a word, he reached over, steadying her hand. His touch was calloused, warm, startlingly gentle for a man who looked like he could break granite with his bare fists. "Why did you save me?" she asked, her voice a whisper. He leaned back in his chair, eyes gray and unreadable. "Because no one else would, and because I know what it's like to be left behind." The silence that followed wasn't awkward. It was thick with unspoken truths. The kind of silence that belonged to two people who had both been betrayed by the world. Over the next few days, she learned his name, Garrett Wolfe, though the town called him Gray, as if his name alone warned others to stay away. He lived alone, miles from anyone, surviving by hunting, trapping, and trading pelts in the very town that had condemned him as dangerous. He never explained why the town feared him. Hattie overheard whispers back in Silverwood that he'd once been a soldier, that he'd killed a man, that he preferred wolves to people. But in the cabin, she saw something different. He cooked without complaint, split wood before dawn, and always left the larger portion of food for her. Hattie, still weak, began to notice small things. The way he glanced at her when she coughed, the way he tended the fire higher at night so she wouldn't wake shivering, the way his rough hands shook slightly when he replaced the bandages on her frost-bitten fingers. One evening, as snow beat softly against the window, she said quietly, "You shouldn't have saved me. I'm nothing but trouble for you." Gray's head lifted. "You think I saved you out of pity?" She hesitated. "Didn't you?" He shook his head, standing to stir the fire. "No, I saved you because I was tired of watching good things die." When he turned back, his eyes locked on hers, steady, certain, and a little haunted. "You're not leaving here until you can stand on your own again, and even then," he said slowly, "you'll decide where to go, not them." Outside, the wind howled like a wounded thing, but inside the cabin, for the first time in her life, Hattie felt something like peace. The storm raged for days. The mountains vanished beneath a sea of white, and Silverwood, that cruel, shallow town, might as well have ceased to exist. Inside Gray's cabin, time slowed. The fire became their sun, the wind outside their only reminder that the world was still turning. At first, Hattie barely spoke. She was ashamed of her body, of her weakness, of the way she had needed saving. When Gray handed her food, she ate quickly, turning her face away so he wouldn't see her eat. She still believed the lies that Silverwood had fed her, that her size made her worthless, that kindness toward her could only ever be pity. But Gray didn't treat her like she was fragile. He gave her space, but he also gave her purpose. One morning, he dropped a bundle of fur pelts in her lap. "Sort these by size," he said. She blinked, startled. "You want me to help?" "You want to sit around feeling sorry for yourself?" he replied, his tone blunt but not cruel. "You work, you get stronger. You get stronger, you start living again." And so she worked. She sorted hides, mended torn shirts, even learned to stir his thick venison stew without burning it. Every task was a small victory. When she dropped something, Gray never scolded, just picked it up, handed it back, and said, "Try again." He never praised her outright, but sometimes, when he thought she wasn't looking, she caught him watching her with something that looked a lot like pride. By the end of the week, Hattie could stand without wobbling. The color had returned to her cheeks. One morning, she caught her reflection in the frost-covered window, and for the first time in years, she didn't see a girl to be pitied. She saw someone who'd survived. "Storm's breaking," Gray said that afternoon, fastening his coat. "Come outside." She hesitated but followed him out into the dazzling snowlight. The world glittered, endless white hills under a sky so blue it hurt to look at. Gray pointed toward the ridge. "See that trail? It leads to a frozen stream. I set traps there. You'll come with me." Her eyes widened. "Me?" He gave a faint smirk. "You're not made of glass, are you?" The path was difficult, steep, uneven, the snow soft beneath their boots. Gray walked ahead, cutting a path, but slowed his pace so she could keep up. When she stumbled, he didn't offer to carry her, just turned back, extended his hand, and said, "Up." You're doing fine." At the stream, they checked traps. 2 were empty. One held a snow hare, limp and pale. Gray worked quietly, efficient, his hand steady. Hattie watched, fascinated. "You do this every day?" she asked. "Every day the mountain lets me," he said, glancing up. "You learn to take only what you need, or she'll take back more than you can afford." When they started back, the sun dipped low, turning the snow gold. Halfway to the cabin, Hattie slipped on ice and fell to her knees. "Go ahead," she said bitterly. "I'll catch up." But Gray didn't move. He stood in front of her, waiting. "Get up." "I can't," she muttered. He crouched, his voice low but firm. "Yes, you can. You've already done harder things. You survived that town. You survived the storm. You're not stopping here." Something inside her cracked open. The years of humiliation, loneliness, being told she wasn't enough. And in the quiet strength of his voice, she found the courage to rise. When they reached the cabin, the first stars were blooming across the sky. She collapsed near the fire, panting, laughing breathlessly. Gray handed her a tin cup of hot tea and said, almost grudgingly, "You kept up better than I expected." She smiled, cheeks flushed. "You doubted me?" He grunted, hiding a smirk behind his cup. "Not for long." That night, as the fire burned low, Hattie sat awake long after Gray had gone to bed, staring into the flames. The world had always told her she would never belong. But here, in a lonely mountain cabin with a man the world feared, she felt something she'd never known before. She felt wanted. By the time the snow began to soften and drip from the cabin roof, Hattie and Gray had slipped into a rhythm, a quiet, wordless understanding that felt older than either of them. Days began before sunrise. Gray chopped wood outside, his axe splitting through the morning air, while Hattie cooked over the fire, humming softly under her breath. The scent of cornmeal biscuits and coffee filled the small space, mingling with pine smoke. "Eat before it gets cold," she said one morning, setting his plate on the table. He grunted, his usual form of thanks, and sat down. They ate in silence at first, but lately that silence had started to feel warm rather than awkward. Hattie had changed. Her face had color again. Her hands no longer trembled when she worked. She had learned to sew patches into his shirts, to salt and smoke meat, even to mend a snare line when the wire snapped. The first time she caught her own rabbit, Gray said nothing, just nodded once. But the smallest flicker of pride passed through his eyes, and it made her heart race faster than she wanted to admit. Still, there were moments she saw the shadow in him, when the sky darkened or thunder rolled over the mountains. He'd stand by the window, shoulders tense, eyes far away, as though remembering ghosts she couldn't see. One evening, when the firelight caught the scars across his back as he changed shirts, she finally asked, "What happened to you, Gray?" He paused, pulling the fabric back into place. For a long time, he said nothing. Then, in a low, careful voice, he replied, "I used to fight in the war. Thought I was doing the right thing. Lost men who trusted me, lost things I can't get back. The town thinks I'm dangerous because I don't talk about it." Hattie swallowed. "You saved me when no one else would. That's not dangerous." He looked at her then, really looked at her, eyes steady, unreadable. "I didn't save you," he said quietly. "You were the one who refused to die." That night, when he went to add wood to the fire, she stopped him. "Gray," she said softly, "thank you for giving me somewhere to live, somewhere I'm not invisible." He hesitated, then brushed a stray curl from her forehead with the back of his hand. "You make this place feel like more than a shelter," he murmured. "Feels like home again." It was the first time she saw him smile, a real one, small and unguarded. Days melted into weeks. They built new routines, tending the small vegetable patch, patching the roof, repairing his sled. Sometimes they didn't need words at all. He would bring her wildflowers tucked into a bundle of firewood. She would leave an extra biscuit on his plate without saying a thing. In a world that had offered them cruelty, they had found quiet kindness in each other. One afternoon, Hattie asked to learn how to shoot. Gray frowned, but handed her the rifle. "Fine, but you listen to me or you lose a toe." She rolled her eyes, something she never would have dared to do weeks earlier, and took aim at a log 50 feet away. Her first shot went wide. The second struck closer. By the fourth, she clipped the edge of the target. She turned toward him, triumphant. He raised an eyebrow. Beginner's luck. Or maybe, she teased, a good teacher. He huffed, hiding a smirk behind his beard. "Don't push it." That night, when snow began to fall again, they sat beside the fire as the cabin glowed with golden light. Hattie mended one of his shirts while he carved a small wooden figure, a fox, delicate and detailed. When he handed it to her, she blinked in surprise. "For me?" He nodded once. "Figured you could use some company when I'm out trapping." Her eyes stung. "You keep pretending you're not kind," she said softly. He met her gaze. "And you keep pretending you're not brave." Silence fell, but it was full of something unspoken, the slow, steady warmth of two broken souls mending together. That night, when the wind howled through the pines, Hattie dreamed not of the cruel faces of Silverwood, but of laughter, sunlight, and the strong hands that had pulled her back from the edge of death. And for the first time in her life, she woke with a smile. By early spring, the snow melted into muddy trails, and for the first time since the blizzard, word of the outside world reached their cabin. A traveling trader came by on horseback, trading dried goods for furs. Hattie stood by the doorway as Gray spoke with him, her heart pounding, when she heard the name Silverwood. "They're saying the big woman from Thornhill's shop disappeared," the trader said, leaning in. "Sheriff's offering a reward for anyone who finds her." He grinned, missing 2 teeth. "Guess they think she ran off with someone." Gray's expression darkened. They let her freeze in the storm. Now they want to play heroes? The trader shrugged. "People like to rewrite stories. Makes it easier to sleep at night." After he left, the air inside the cabin felt different, heavier. Hattie stared into the fire that night, twisting her hands in her lap. "Maybe I should go back," she whispered. "If they think I'm missing, they might blame you." Gray looked up sharply. "They already blamed me long before you ever came along. I don't lose sleep over cowards and liars." "But what if they come here? Then they'll wish they hadn't." His tone left no room for argument. Still, the tension lingered. Gray began checking his traps closer to the ridge, scanning the horizon more often. And at night, when Hattie caught him sitting by the window with his rifle across his knees, she realized something she hadn't before. He wasn't afraid for himself. He was afraid for her. A week later, the threat came true. Just after dawn, hoofbeats thundered up the trail. Gray stepped outside, rifle in hand. A wagon stopped near the fence, carrying Mrs. Thornhill and 2 men from Silverwood, one the sheriff, the other a ranch hand who used to laugh every time Hattie passed through town. "There she is!" Thornhill shouted, pointing toward the doorway where Hattie now stood frozen. "That's my worker. She abandoned her post and owes me 2 months' wages. I demand you hand her over." Gray's voice was calm, but cold. "You left her to die. That debt's paid." The sheriff, uncomfortable but firm, cleared his throat. "Now, Garrett, you can't just keep someone up here like property." "Property?" Gray cut him off, stepping closer. His voice dropped to a growl. "You shut your mouth before you choke on those words. She's here because you left her behind." Hattie trembled, tears burning her eyes. "They locked the doors," she said, her voice shaking. "They all did." For a moment, even the sheriff's face fell, but Mrs. Thornhill wasn't done. "You think anyone will believe her over me?" she hissed. "That town barely tolerates you, Wolf. They think you're a murderer, a savage." "Then they'd be right to think I could bury you out here and no one would ever find the body," he said softly. The silence that followed was thick, dangerous. The men shifted uneasily, hands twitching toward their guns. Finally, the sheriff raised a hand. "That's enough. Nobody's dying today. Mrs. Thornhill, you've got no proof of anything except your own cruelty. Leave before you make this worse." Her face twisted with rage. "You'll regret this," she spat. But as she turned the wagon around, she never looked back. Maybe because she didn't want to meet the eyes of the woman she'd left to die. When the sound of hooves faded, Hattie realized she was shaking. Gray turned to her, lowering his rifle. "You all right?" She nodded, though her voice broke. I thought I'd never stand up to her." "You didn't have to," he said quietly. "You just had to stand." That night, as they sat by the fire, the last barrier between them seemed to fall away. "They'll never come again," Gray said finally. "I know," Hattie whispered, "because now they know I'm not alone." He looked at her then, not as the girl he'd rescued, but as the woman who'd found her strength. "No," he said softly, "you never were." And for the first time, the word mine no longer sounded like possession. It sounded like promise. The peace lasted only a few days. By the following week, a cold gray sky settled over the valley, the kind of sky that promised trouble. Gray knew it before the first echo of hoofbeats reached the cabin. He stepped onto the porch, his rifle slung over one shoulder. 3 riders were coming fast up the ridge. "They're back," he muttered. Hattie, who had been folding blankets near the hearth, froze. "Mrs. Thornhill?" "No," Gray said, narrowing his eyes. "Worse. Hired men. Paid guns." He turned to her, his voice steady but urgent. "Go inside. Lock the door. No matter what you hear, you stay put." She shook her head. "I won't hide again." "Hattie, I said no." The fire in her voice startled even him. "I've been hiding my whole life, Gray. I'm done being small." For a long second, he looked at her. This woman who once trembled in the snow, now standing before him with her chin high and eyes unflinching. Something fierce and proud flickered in his chest. He nodded once. "Then stay close." The riders stopped 20 yards out. Their leader, a tall man with a scar running down his jaw, called out, "We're here for the girl. Mrs. Thornhill says she's her property." Gray lifted his rifle but didn't fire. "You tell that witch the mountain doesn't answer to her. She sends men here again, I'll send them back in boxes." The man laughed, spitting into the snow. "There's a bounty on her. Dead or alive works just the same." Before he could finish, a single shot rang out, clean, sharp, deliberate. The bullet struck his hat, spinning it off his head. Hattie stood behind Gray, her hand steady on the second rifle. "I don't miss twice," she said evenly. The men hesitated. Gray took one step forward. "You heard her. Now ride." They did. The mountain swallowed them whole. When silence returned, Hattie lowered the gun, her breath shaking. Gray turned, eyes soft with something between admiration and disbelief. "Where'd you learn to shoot like that?" "You taught me," she said, smiling through tears. He laughed quietly, the sound deep and rare. "Remind me never to make you mad." That night, the cabin glowed like a lantern in the dark. Hattie sat beside Gray, their shoulders touching, the air between them humming with what hadn't yet been said. "You're not going back to Silverwood," he told her. She met his gaze. "There's nothing there for me anymore." He nodded, his voice low. "Then stay. Stay where you're wanted." And when he leaned in, brushing his lips against hers, tentative at first, then certain, the world outside seemed to vanish into snow and silence. The storm had once tried to kill her. Now it guarded their home. Spring came slowly to the mountains. The last of the snow melted into clear streams. Wildflowers began to bloom across the meadow, and sunlight spilled through the pines. Hattie stood on the porch one morning, her hands wrapped around a tin cup of coffee, watching mist rise from the valley. It had been months since anyone from Silverwood dared to come near the ridge. The silence was no longer heavy. It was peace. Inside, Gray was fixing a loose board on the floor. His hair had grown longer, streaked with silver, his beard thick and wild. When he caught her watching him, he gave a small smile, something he didn't do often, but always saved for her. "Penny for your thoughts?" he asked. "I was just thinking," she said softly, "if the people down there could see us now, they wouldn't recognize either of us." "Good," he said. "We ain't living for them." She stepped closer, resting her hand on his shoulder. "You gave me a home, Gray." He looked up, his eyes gentle. "No, you built it. Every fire, every meal, every laugh that came back into these walls. You made this a place worth staying." That night they sat together by the fire, the same place where he had once warmed her frozen hands, the same fire that had brought her back to life. Outside, the wind whispered through the pines, but it no longer sounded cruel. Gray reached for her hand. "You're safe here," he murmured. "It's your home now, if you'll have it." Hattie's eyes shimmered. "It already is." And as the flames danced across the cabin walls, the mountain man and the girl the world left to die found the kind of love that not even a blizzard could extinguish. Every time I share a story like Hattie and Gray's, I'm reminded how love can grow in the most unexpected places, even in a frozen world that once felt cruel. Maybe you've been left out in the cold, too, by people who never saw your worth. But somewhere out there, someone will see you exactly as you are and say, "You're safe now. You're home." Tell me, where are you listening from tonight? The mountains? The city? Somewhere between? If you still believe that love can heal even the deepest wounds, stay. The next story is for you.